mention this is being recorded.
Yeah, no, I see. Zoom shows me that it's being recorded, which I assumed. So no problem. Don't worry about it.
I mean, when you invite somebody to a podcast, you sort of assume.
You assume, right? But exactly.
But still, I should actually say it. I think it was in the email as well. But anyway, so a good place to start might simply be to just tell me a bit about yourself. So you're based in Boston, but what's your background and how did you get to where you are now?
Sure. Right. So I started out making websites in the late 90s. So this gives you a sense of how old I am.
Okay, that's sorry to interrupt you right away, but that's sort of very similar to me there. So at least we're on the same kind of level.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay.
It really saved me because I actually studied. I have this was in undergraduate school, and I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in comparative religion. So that was not going to be something I could get a lot of lucrative work out of. So it was very lucky for me that I discovered how much I liked making websites, because that really turned into my career.
Okay.
So I did that. I just made websites, in a sort of either freelancing or for web agencies, basically advertising style kind of shops, small shops usually, for many, many years. And I started out early enough in this where if you were making websites, you did all of it, right? You did the design, you did the coding, know. And I kind of focused in those first early years on front-end development. So I was really kind of focused on engineering, but I continued to do a lot of design. And over time, that all kind of shifted into a user experience focus. Mm-hmm. Rather than graphic design on the one hand or like back-end engineering on the other. I kind of stayed in this user experience, UI kind of area. And that also, I also shifted over time to doing that work more for applications than for what we would just call websites.
Yeah.
Just because the work was more interesting to me. There's only so many, websites over that decade really started to sort of become the same thing. You have a certain kind of nav and you might have a different graphical sort of look and feel, but it was the same website over and over again.
You're just playing with different colors and fonts.
Right. Which to me wasn't, right. It wasn't the most interesting aspect of the work. So I sort of zeroed in on doing more application work because that was more interesting to me. And then, so I was doing user experience design development for software as a service, applications. Eventually, so I was freelancing doing that for a while. And then eventually one of my clients as a freelancer hired me. It was a startup and they hired me as their director of user experience. So I did that for a few years until we were acquired. And during the last couple of years of that is when I had the idea for TallyLab, which is my current company that I founded. And that is a sort of data platform, but it's a small data platform rather than a big data platform.
Okay.
Which it's just sort of a small place to put together various trackers of any kind, and you can pull in data from outside, or you can set up custom trackers, and then you can kind of play with that data and see if there's any correlations to be found or any other insights.
Okay, so what is TallyLab exactly, and who's it for?
Right. So it's a data platform. It's really for, I know everyone says this, it's really for anyone, but okay. I understand that that's, a little too broad. The people that we find want to use it most are people who are doing it. So there's personal users, there's consumers, and those people tend to be people who are tracking symptoms like health conditions or like maybe fitness plans. It's a way of kind of bringing together data they're gathering elsewhere or just data from a bunch of different categories into one place so they can figure out, I think this medication makes me lethargic, or I think that this set of symptoms is combined with, this set of things I'm doing. And it's HIPAA compliant by default. So it's HIPAA and GDPR compliant. So when people don't have to worry about their health data being compromised is a big selling point. But we also have a business side, and we're finding a lot of traction with companies that gather data about children. So gaming, like educational gaming or healthcare data about children, because it's so private, people feel a lot more comfortable using it to gather that data because they don't have to worry about it getting leaked or hacked.
Right. So where is the data stored? Is it stored on their device, or?
It's stored locally on their device, and then it is backed up, but it's backed up in a peer-to-peer fashion. So there isn't really a cloud. It's not cloud computing in the sense of how we have come to understand it. We do back up our customers' data, but we back it up in one giant brick. Like, I have no idea what's in there. It's an encrypted block to me, right? And then anyone who's collaborating on data inside of the customer or the user, it just lives on their devices. So they don't have to worry about it being on a cloud server somewhere that can get hacked or leaked, or that the engineers working on the app can see their data. Like, none of that is possible. Yeah.
Do you mind if I interrupt you for a minute and
No.
just pause for a second? Because this is the fun thing of working remotely and from home. And I think there's somebody at the door. Give me 1 minute. Sorry.
Okay.
Hi there.
Hi.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
There's a friend of ours who passes by to kind of like drop off some milk, and he's basically like a sort of a milkman, but just on this is like, he's a doctor, but he sort of moonlights as a there's like a nice dairy farm, and he just came by to pick up some bottles, which I'd forgotten about. But sorry, that's
no problem.
Okay, so we were talking about the way you were backing up data. I'll most likely edit this bit out, by the way.
Yeah, that's fine.
But we were talking about how data is backed up.
Right. But this is actually very germane to our environmental considerations. So the fact that data is backed up in a peer-to-peer way, and it's just device to device for the most part. The presentation I gave at Sustainable UX last year was actually about this kind of architecture and whether or not it is more energy efficient. And I kind of
So let's get right into that.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the reason that I reached out to you is that I spoke to James, and he we discussed the kind of topics that he had in his conference, and yours sort of like stood out as one, like, okay, because the carbon footprint of the internet is something that we ignore a lot. I think a lot of people just think like, oh, as you said, it's in the cloud. We don't actually see it. There's no feedback loop for the end user or even the developer nowadays. So what have you, what is the kind of like the talk you gave there? Like, what's the point that you were trying to make?
So the point was, I actually walked through, I shouldn't say no one. There's very little solid research about comparing different architectural models for applications and what their carbon impact really is in terms of using electricity. And obviously it really depends on where you're getting your electricity. So if you are a cloud app, but your server farm is right next to a hydroelectric, dam, then great. That's your electricity is fairly clean. But as we know, most places where like big data centers where these applications are being run from aren't carbon neutral at all. And so the question I was asking, I kind of used the excuse of pitching this talk at Sustainable UX to kind of actually find the answer. I did the math, I looked at what the research was and sort of compared, okay, here's what we know a given application request to a cloud app looks like in terms of energy expenditure. And then here's what we know about a peer-to-peer app. And I did find that, it gets very technical, and I can send you the slides. The video is online if you want to watch it. But in the end, peer-to-peer architectures do stand to save quite a bit of electricity, because me running my phone and then connecting to you to share data on your phone, those phones are sipping electricity. They are not using huge amounts of electricity, right? Whereas a server farm really is. And so even if we multiply all of these little devices, a laptop or a phone, by millions, it doesn't come close to these huge data centers that are really burning a lot of energy. And frankly, they tend to burn a lot of coal. At least in the case of a peer-to-peer app, if the homes of the people using the app are run off of solar, say, or wind, then great. That's a perfectly clean situation.
Well, how much of a difference are we talking about when you're saying it's using less? How much less?
Right. It's like an order of magnitude. Let me pull it up, actually. I can tell you.
Yeah, go for it.
It was really fun. It was, I'm a nerd, so it was really fun doing the math for me. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, there's like this end comparison I do. Okay. Okay, so the comparison was, so the example I used was downloading a single MP3. It was just a known quantity. Obviously, interactions are far more complex than that, and there's a lot of back and forth. But basically, a centralized, cloud computing situation, downloading a single MP3 was 236 watt hours. So you could just think of it as watts, which is a lot, right? If you think of a 100-watt bulb burning for an hour, this is 2 of those download an MP3.
So downloading an MP3.
But if
how much did you say? 236 watt hours.
Right. That's just a straight me connecting to your computer and downloading it, basically. Sure. Not in a peer-to-peer way, and me connecting to like a server in a server farm and just downloading it. However, that's not typically how the internet works these days. It's a lot more distributed, right? So if you take a distributed, but it's still client server model, it was 0.03 watt hours. So that's significantly less. But if you then further do a distributed but peer-to-peer model, it's 0.006 watt hours. So it's like with each of these, you're getting, so basically the current model of the internet, it's 0.03 versus distributed, it's 0.006. So it's, less than half. It's like, I don't know if I actually,
quite a bit less than half.
It's a lot less, right? I'll send you.
I'm very bad at off the top. It's like arithmetic.
Yeah, me too. I'm trying to see if I can send you the slides with my notes. I have a PDF of that.
Well, if I've done it correctly, it's 20%, right?
Yes.
It's so.
Right. Exactly. Right.
So peer-to-peer is basically 4 or 5 times more efficient.
Right.
Or
exactly.
less you consume.
And I was being extremely conservative because the cost with peer-to-peer ends up being in the mapping of the network. you have to maintain a map so that any request knows where to go. And there's a lot of overhead with that. Whereas with a client server, the map is well trod. There's one path where you go to get your data, not possibly hundreds of paths.
Right.
But
Okay.
but it turns out that keeping that map of a distributed network is a lot less energy intensive than keeping a centralized store of servers and cooling them, right? That's really the problem.
Okay. All right. So what got you into sort of like, what got you thinking about this?
So what got me thinking about it is that we had decided to do this peer-to-peer architecture for TallyLab for ethical reasons. We felt like there were a couple of ethical angles here, one of which was the privacy angle. If it's local first, we don't have to mess with your data.
Yeah.
You don't even have to trust us because we never have your data in an unencrypted form. You don't have to believe us. You can trust that we're not going to do anything with it because we can't. So there was that ethical reason. The other ethical reason is that there's a huge societal cost with the consolidation of these services with single companies. So like Amazon basically runs the internet right now, right? And Amazon isn't a fantastically ethical company, right?
Yeah,
to put it mildly.
Let's not get into that for now.
Sure, for now, but you see what I'm saying. Like there's another
Yeah.
ethical claim to be made about a distributed internet sort of for democratic reasons, right? So those were the reasons that we decided to go with a peer-to-peer architecture. And then it began to kind of eat away at me, this question of whether it was actually more energy efficient. Because as we scale, we're going to be using more resources as an application. And it dawned on me that, we've taken steps to kind of locate the servers, the server suppliers we can use who do have carbon offsets or are carbon neutral in other ways. But the more I thought about it, the more I had this question of like, well, is the system itself, what if everybody did this? Would we be in just as bad a situation, if not worse, than the current one that we're in?
Okay.
And I really wanted to answer that question for myself because it's another ethical consideration to me. There's the ethics of the data of our users, but there's also the ethics of, if everyone uses a model like our model, are we actually going to like incinerate planet Earth? And frankly, part of that was the rise of cryptocurrency and realizing, there's a lot of claims about cryptocurrency with regard to a distributed peer-to-peer model. And it was starting to this question was coming up in my mind, which was, okay, we know now how energy intensive cryptocurrencies are. Does that mean that peer-to-peer models are energy intensive, or just is it something about cryptocurrency?
Yeah,
right?
I don't know that much. I know that the mining of coins,
yes, exactly,
is extremely energy intensive.
Right. And in the course of my talk, I ended up framing it kind of like it's really one of the most direct routes to just converting fossil fuels into cash that I've ever seen. It's like mining Bitcoin is mining. Basically like input electricity, churn out cash, right?
Yeah.
And it disturbed me. And so I was like, I want to make sure that it's not the peer-to-peer aspect, which would frighten me, right? I don't want to contribute to that kind of, because there's like a lot of models that show that if we continue down this crypto path, we're going to use up all of the remaining fossil fuels we have in the ground within the next decade or something, right?
Yeah. Let's get into that a little bit as well. But before that, I want to ask you. So you obviously when you started this company, you already were fairly sensitive to ethical issues, right? And
yes.
you're mentioning like privacy, for example, at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Which in my head is actually very interlinked with the climate issue, because it's sort of people not caring, not looking, not sort of like going through to the sort of working out what all the consequences of something are.
Yes, exactly. Not thinking through the generational impact of what we're building.
Well, yeah. Another designer I spoke to recently put it as a sort of how was it? These side effects, these unforeseen consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended
yes,
consequences
exactly.
are not unforeseeable.
Right.
So it's just that you're not giving a shit.
Right.
To put it very bluntly. But so just from a business point of view, because we all need to kind of strike a balance or try to at least.
Yes.
What, do your customers care about the stuff? Has it been, harder to sell your stuff because you're being more sort of paying attention to these aspects, or has it been beneficial in some ways?
I would say with a certain narrow set of customers, it is the selling point of what we're building. But more broadly speaking, I wouldn't say it's made it harder, but most people don't care. They just don't care. They want something that is going to help them do their work faster or cheaper. And they don't really care what the ethical implications are, either from an environmental standpoint or from a sort of, privacy standpoint. Which in that case, I guess it ends up being harder for us because we don't have yet, anyway, we don't have a huge differentiator otherwise from other things they could be using or buying. So in the sense that it's more expensive for us to sell what we're doing and not under the model that we would prefer to use for ethical reasons, because it's more expensive, that means we're going to have fewer customers, so it does end up being harder to sell in a certain way, but not because people are. What I find is that people sort of recognize that these issues should matter to them. Climate change should matter to them. Data privacy should matter to them, but they don't matter. And it actually ends up making them feel kind of guilty because they know they should care, but they don't.
But why do you think they don't? I mean, maybe it's a very hard question, right? And I am not expecting, if you had the answer, yes, please share it. But just from your experience of specifically on this very narrow segment of people, they know they should care, but they don't.
Mm-hmm.
What's
Why?
your take on that? Yeah.
Because I don't think that I don't think the impact is yet proximate enough to them. They really don't feel the heat, so to speak, about these things yet. And they are going to delay that reckoning as long as they possibly can. I think, if I were exclusively trying to sell to people on islands that are sinking, then their perspective on climate change would be very different. Or for people who have had their identity on the privacy side, for people who have had their identity stolen, for instance. I mean, I should say, I really look at, I see a huge parallel between the way our economy has run off of fossil fuels for the last century to how it is transitioning now to running off of personal data. And it's a similarly extractive model with similarly catastrophic consequences if we don't cut it out ASAP, right? And people just keep delaying this reckoning because it's not present enough yet, right? And that's to me what the problem really is that it's cheaper to do the bad thing than it is to do the good thing.
Yeah.
And they're not really feeling the consequences of doing the bad thing. So there's not really, I don't know how to force those consequences into more focus for them.
No, it's very hard because it's all very abstract. Another of the people I interviewed, I'll steal his analogy because I really enjoyed it. He was talking about this feedback, the fact that you can't see a feedback loop, and he was like, if you plugged up your sink and you open the tap, it's going to be very obvious what's going to happen in 10 minutes time, or however fast, how much water pressure you have. Whereas when you're looking at this thing on a global scale and, and you're going about your business in Boston and somebody's island at the other end of the world is that's, even scientists have had a hard time making sense of it, still do. And it's even harder to explain. So that kind of makes sense. Sadly, but it makes sense, that it's not in your face. Unfortunately, when it does get to be in our faces, it's going to be a little bit too late.
It's going to be way too late, right? And this is why we have governments to think about these longer term questions and make them more proximate to us via taxes or whatever else. But clearly, we cannot rely on them to do that.
Well, certainly not. Yeah, I mean, without getting into sort of other aspects of policies, but the government you currently have in the States is certainly not tackling this problem. And I'm based in the UK. The government we have here has declare the climate emergency, but it's just,
It's just words. It's not right.
it's just words. Nothing has really happened. So just this thing of ethics, sort of. I'm thinking about this very much from the climate point of view, but it is more far-reaching, like more broad in tech, right? We've seen a huge number of issues. So there's been over the last couple of sort of like years, it's kind of become a bit more of an issue of like, diversity, inclusion, and things like that. And we've uncovered huge, pretty horrific sort of stories in some companies, right?
Yes.
And then you've got the whole privacy thing, both in terms of personal privacy of like, people know where you are, location.
Yep.
You're being listened to in your house if you have a thing, one of these spy devices. Sorry, you can see where I am.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Or and also like this aggregation of data, like the way that Facebook can influence very large social groups, right?
Yes.
And these sort of issues don't really come up as, like, you don't go to conferences and hear much about ethics or like really proper ethical conversations, right? I don't mean like, oh, if the user says unsubscribe, then we should respect that and unsubscribe. But it's more of the like, should we have a mailing list in the first place? Right? Is that a good thing?
Right.
So the question is sort of, it's not really a question, but it's more of a it feels to me like tech is quite amoral, whereas it sort of presents itself as not being so, right? It's by default, it's like it's for the good of humanity. And I was sort of curious to know, your thoughts, like from people you speak to or these conferences you attend and so on. What's is this changing at all? Are we kind of like, should I be super gloomy about the prospects, or where's your head
I
at?
think, I mentioned the All Tech is Human conference, and that was amazing because yes, other conferences I go to that are not specifically about ethics in tech, no one's talking about it. And in fact, if you bring it up, people kind of like just walk away. Like it's because the problem is that most of technology, as far as like internet-based technology, when you get down to the root of it, is data surveillance right now, right? And that's the business model, more or less. And so when I pop up and say, hey, I think this is unethical, I'm basically saying, I think your entire business is unethical. And it's a really bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow. They don't want to hear that, especially if they're a lower level person, they're just an engineer among hundreds of engineers in this large corporation. A lot of them are just like, what am I supposed to do about this? But I do think, and this was a topic of conversation at All Tech is Human, a lot of these engineers are some of the most well-educated and, as you say, well-meaning people on planet Earth. They really do think they're doing good things. They're helping expand human productivity and human connectivity, right? And so if they organized, it's really tough to get good tech talent right now. It's like it's a scarce resource. And the more that sort of tech workers organize and walk out and refuse to work on things they find unethical, they stand to really make a difference, because it's a scarce, their labor is a scarce resource. And they're in a race against the AI that they are themselves building, right? Because at some point they're going to put themselves out of a job.
I didn't mention that in the list of things that sort of are worrying when it comes to the ethics of it, but it's AI is another one, right? There've been so many examples of kind of AI. I'm sort of like risking coming across as a tech hater or something like that. And I'm not.
I mean, I think I come across that way too, but I am a technologist at heart. I love using technology to solve problems, real human problems.
Yeah.
That's my thing. I just think that we could do it a little bit more thoughtfully and ethically. I don't think it has to be this zero sum. You don't have to just throw out all technology and go move to a cabin in the woods and say, I refuse to participate, you know?
Right, which seems to be like that is, because you said like, a lot of people might come back with or have this feeling of like, but what am I supposed to do? Right?
Yes.
If you're like just an engineer or just a designer, I say just like really within quotes because they are the people who drive the companies, right? Literally, if the engineers went on strike, Amazon would be screwed to a very large degree. But what can they do about this, right? Because I think a lot of people feel like, well, I either give up and go live in the woods, or else I put up with it, right? And obviously you've done something about it. Now, admittedly, you've started a company, and as a CEO there, you have more ability to say this is how we do it.
But not infinite ability, because I have to still make this company work. And if I can't, it'll be a real argument against building ethical tech, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So what can people do on a sort of like grassroots level within companies?
I would say within company.
How do you have this conversation?
Number one, and this is honestly the toughest thing, but speak up and keep speaking up, even if you feel like you aren't making a difference. Just when you're in the meeting and someone proposes something that you find unethical, say so. But continue to stay engaged in the conversation. Say, I really think that's unethical. Here's another direction we could go that would be more ethical. And when you get shut down, which will probably happen more often than not, just keep at it. I mean, it's very tough. It's very tiring, but I think that's like level one. And with climate stuff, this is actually in a weird way easier, because you can just say, hey, why don't we spend a few cents more every month on server costs and buy it from this other company that is carbon neutral? Like, that's not that huge of an ask, right?
No.
And in fact, the engineers at Amazon recently made that ask in a big way. So that's kind of step two. So step one is individual action, which is just when you see something happening that you think is unethical, just say so.
You said that doing that step one is very tough and very tiring. You said, both those things, and you kind of said this in a way that sounds like you've been through that.
I have.
What have you done?
Let's see. So to put this diplomatically, the last startup that I was at, the purpose of the software we were building was initially to help progressive nonprofits do better organizing online, to sort of engage more fruitfully with their constituencies on social media.
Okay.
And over time, it really turned into a data surveillance operation where we were just hoovering in all of these nonprofits' constituents' data and analyzing it and selling the data back to our customers. And I fought that constantly. I thought it was wrong. It often was in direct violation of the social media networks' own privacy policies and anti-spam policies. We actually got cut off by Twitter at one point because we were in violation of their policies. And I had warned the CEO that this would happen and had suggested a way to avoid it. And she had told me no. She was just like, I don't care. We're going to keep doing this until they force us to stop, was her attitude. And so that was really hard, but I kept showing up and I kept making the argument and I kept proposing alternative solutions.
Were you a sort of a lone voice here? Were the other
it was me and really the entire tech team were in agreement. But we were not the most powerful voices inside the company. And then we were acquired and we were drowned out. The company that acquired us was much larger and much more wedded to data surveillance as a long-standing sort of structural, like a business model, right? And so I went from being inside of, Zoom calls with my team that were relatively small saying these things to being in boardrooms with 20 people. And I would raise my hand and say, it would be a meeting about how we could find the loopholes in GDPR. And I would raise my hand and say, what if we actually got on board with the spirit of this law? and made it our ethical code as well, rather than trying to find the loopholes. And just silence. And then people would just continue talking as if I hadn't ever made the suggestion. It was really tense, and it was hard. And I ended up leaving because I could see quickly that there was, I spent a year at that company and I tried to fight the good fight. And I could see that there was no way that I was going to turn this aircraft carrier around,
Right.
And but I would say to people, do that while you are where you are. You can do something today for sure. You can go to your manager and say, hey, I did some research and I think we could do XYZ and it would be better for the environment, or it would be better for our users. You can do that today and they will probably ignore you, but like, you can do that work, and it will, you'll at least be a voice in their mind later when they're thinking about their options for what to do next.
Yeah.
So that's like step one, but it's way more powerful if you can organize internally. So that's sort of step two, which is get critical mass of people to agree with you.
Even for organizing internally, you do need to speak up, because at the end of the day, you could have 100 people who are thinking the same thing in their heads, but
yes, exactly. No,
if nobody's sort of saying something, whatever,
then nobody knows that
on a Slack back channel, or at the water cooler or whatever, in a bathroom. I don't know. You need to
if you feel unsafe in your position speaking out, then I feel like organizing is an alternative, because you can have one-on-one conversations, kind of find your allies without letting the upper management realize what's happening until you have a critical mass. And then you can kind of spring it on them. Like, hey, you can't ignore us. It's 100 engineers now. It's not just me, Jordyn, being like a kook or whatever. Yeah. And then, as a very last resort, I would say, quit and start your own thing, or go work at a company that does support your ethical inclinations. Because if enough people did that, you best believe, if we just starved these companies of their engineering talent, they wouldn't be able to operate. But again, we only have so much time for that strategy until there's robots doing our jobs. So,
right. Well, yeah. Well, I think that's, I don't know. It's maybe a bit overrated for the average company, at least.
For a long time, sure. I mean, I think when I say that, I guess I say it's only a matter of time. It's decades away, but it's still, this isn't gonna be a fast fix.
No, but it's interesting you're thinking about sort of the kind of the engineers and the designers kind of taking action, because a lot of the conversations I've had so far are focused on consumers taking action, right? So sort of collective action is very it's hard to organize, but it works, right?
Yes.
And most of sort of the conversations I've had have been like, you get people to stop, if they like do an Amazon strike, for example, show the company, what happens if for a day nobody buys anything.
Right.
But actually making that happen at scale is pretty hard.
It's really hard.
Whereas if you focus on the engineers, it's still a large group of people, but it's a large
it's
group.
Way smaller, right? And but it hits them just as much where it hurts, right?
Yes.
So,
which is an interesting. When I'm sort of not really starting anything at the moment, not rallying anyone right now, right. But it's an interesting way of thinking about it. Okay, let me just ask you one last thing, and then we can probably wrap up there. So. Two things. So first of all, like your product, what you're building at TallyLab, is there something, do you have customers or you yourselves using it for any sort of environmental, climate related projects, right? Something where, the product itself is actually helping you measure carbon footprint or something like that.
Not yet. We have a number of sort of possible partnerships with like citizen science. It's a really good tool for citizen science, actually. So we have a number of proposed projects that haven't come to fruition yet that are environmentally related, that would be using TallyLab to gather data that would further sort of, local conservation efforts, or, measuring CO2 in a particular location, things like that. So I'm trying really hard to come up, to generate a use case for that, because I would love it if that's what TallyLab ends up being good for, right? There's also, from a sort of civics perspective, we have, for the consumer version of the app, we have a number of, when you first sign up, when you first start using it, there's a number of kind of suggested things you can install to start tracking. And we've kind of used that space to promote a civics set of things. So it's basically like, did you vote? Did you go to your city hall, meeting? Did you do a trash cleanup day on the highway?
Right.
Just there's a bunch of sort of suggested things. So we're sort of trying to make it clear that we think we have a kind of direct line to be driving behavior via tracking here. And so that's another angle that we've tried to use. But nothing, nothing tangible yet.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Have you done any sort of thought? How old is TallyLab at the moment, actually? Because
the current version, we've been in open beta for a year.
Okay.
And before that, we had basically been in like an invite only mode for a year before that. So it's basically 2 years old. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you're still fairly at a fairly sort of early stage there to be maybe worrying too much about your own carbon footprint.
But we are, though.
Aside from the infrastructure that we had the conversation there, have you looked at the other sort of costs of running the company? Do you have an office space? Do you travel? Things like that.
Right. So that's very much already on our minds. And I and my co-founder both have worked remotely for a long time, so we don't see any need to get an office space, certainly anytime soon, maybe ever. And we definitely don't travel when we can avoid it for things. I really admire James's work with sustainable UX in this regard, that he's like, we can have conferences that are not a huge carbon footprint if we try. But also, my co-founder and I live in Boston, and while it's not the best in terms of transit, it's a lot better than a lot of other places in America. And so when we do get together, we often both take the train or bike. So, we don't have to rely on flying anywhere typically, which is great. But we are actually in the middle. It's funny that you and I are having this conversation, because just last week we started to put in motion our plan to get all of our infrastructure, the infrastructure that TallyLab runs onto at least carbon neutral, if not, green, actually net posi, taking carbon.
You mean
out.
The hosting provider?
The hosting, where we keep our documentation, things like we basically looked at every single thing we do.
Have you identified providers that you're willing to mention?
Yeah, right now, our interim plan is so we are already using DreamHost for our hosting, and they are carbon neutral. And so we're looking to move, there's some of our infrastructure that we have on other cloud services. So we're going to move all of that onto DreamHost, and because it's an easy win for us for now, because we're already partly there. But we are looking, I know their intention is to become even greener over time, but we have been looking at, there's a name of another company. Let me find it while we're sitting here. Actually, I have it up. Where is it?
Yeah, DreamHost. It's interesting talking to the hosting companies. There's a couple of people I know at DreamHost. I should reach out to them.
You should. I would love if you talk to them. Green Geeks is the one Geeks. that we were looking at. It's just that it's tough for us because they're so, and this is justifiable, but they're so much more expensive. So, right now we're bootstrapped. We don't really have a lot of money. So DreamHost is carbon neutral, but I know Green Geeks is actually net positive.
Yes, they've been they're on my list actually to reach out to as well. But they because they've been around for a decade or so, or maybe longer. I'm not sure, but they set out to do that from the beginning.
Exactly.
But they've had a lot more experience in setting things up right.
Exactly.
And they're more expensive than DreamHost.
Yes.
Okay.
Like significantly more expensive.
Okay.
So we,
Is
that's kind of our goal, is to get everything onto them.
okay.
But in the near term, we can at least get off of the services we're using that are not explicitly carbon neutral, because DreamHost is. So, and we're used to
Okay.
their tools. There's a sort of organizational cost to switching, and you have to kind of weigh them.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay. Oh, that's cool. I'm glad I asked you about that. So this is the last one now.
Okay.
So I mean, obviously, we've had this conversation, for almost like 50 minutes or so, and about sustainability, climate emergency, and so on. But we didn't really talk about like what you think about where we are at the moment, in terms of like, the status of like what this, is it really an emergency? Is it a crisis? What is it? And I've been asking people, sometimes I sort of present it as a spectrum where you've got, on the one hand, you've got like, I don't know if you're familiar with Extinction Rebellion. That
Yes.
got those people on one hand, at one extreme, and then you've got Trump at the other extreme, right?
Right.
I'm gonna guess you're not leaning towards the Trump side.
No.
But where are you? I mean, are you out there protesting?
Yes.
Yourself to
I am. I go
thing?
to I
Have
go
you
to
been
every
arrested?
single one of them that I can, and I am very excited about the existence of Extinction Rebellion. And frankly, I find myself. I think I actually did a climate-related crowdfunding campaign a few years before I founded TallyLab. Like, this
Okay.
is to get a giant sort of open letter run in the LA Times as a full-page ad, because I am just it's beyond a crisis. It's like a slow moving catastrophe, and it boggles my mind that I still seem to be among the minority of humans who take this situation seriously when it's already happening. It's already we're already in the catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, it's about mitigating it and adapting to it. And I find that sometimes I just wonder if my talents would be better served at this moment in history, just like actually doing, like eco-terrorism, frankly, where I'm just like, should I just go like find the nearest gas pipeline and like, I don't know what, dismantle it? Like, I don't know what my role should be. And I often think about, not necessarily the next generation, but the generation after that. Then I see their faces in my mind looking at me
Hmm.
like, what did you do? What were you doing? Were
Yeah.
you just mindlessly consuming and living your life like everything was normal when there was like literally a fire blazing at your door? And I don't want to not have an answer for them. I feel a real responsibility to them. And I feel like if our parents and grandparents had felt more of a responsibility to us, we wouldn't be in this situation. So it's kind of hard to overstate what a crisis I think this is.
Right.
you know?
So yeah, I know, and I mean, in a weird way, I'm kind of glad to hear you say these things, because I know a lot of people think like this.
Yes.
Certainly had, if you, the third or fourth, we'll be launching the first few episodes at the end of the month. Thing is, well, the end of the month is this week, so
Yes.
uh,
It
so
sure is.
maybe not. But one of the first few is David of Hotjar,
Mm.
and he was saying exactly what you're saying right now. It's almost like you
Yep.
like copied down what he said and sort of
Yeah.
like, or he did or something.
And that's really heartening to hear, because I feel completely isolated. And I feel like when I bring it up, I try to talk about climate. I try to frame everything in my life around it, and I bring it up all the time. And I try not to let anyone around me forget that this
Mhm.
is happening. And I don't feel like most people appreciate that.
No, no. The truth is that most people don't. Most people don't yet. What what do you do? What do you? I'll sort of like end on this one, which is related to what we were talking about just now. But a lot of people don't care. But then there's a lot of people who just actively think is bullshit, right?
Yes, right.
I meet a lot of them online. I don't meet a lot of them in person. But do you engage with these people? Do you have do you sort of like walk away? Is it worth sort of saying like, fuck it, you know, these people?
It depends on the platform. You know, if we're talking about Twitter, no, because you can't really know when someone's just a troll or like an actual bot, and it's
Yeah.
usually just a waste of time to engage. If it's way more, if I know there's a real person sitting at the other end, I will typically try to engage somewhat. And you know, I usually frame it in the sense of, like, what's the worst that happens? We get off of fossil fuels? Is that such a horrible future? And I know that a lot of the people that are skeptical about climate change actually fear bigger government, and so that's their real fear. They're like, no, I don't. Their opinion about fossil fuels is sort of neither here nor there, but their attitude is like, well, if we pursue a rapid decarbonization, government will balloon. And I don't really have an answer to them except to say that it will at least buy us time to fix those problems. Like, anyone who comes to me and is like, this other problem is more important to me, my thing is like, I want us to be around as a species so that we can fix that problem too. I want to fix racism. I want to fix, sexism also. But if we're not alive, we can't fix any of those things.
Yeah.
And the worst that happens is we end up with a greener, cleaner world. And I just don't see how that's such a bad future, even if it does turn out that this wasn't the somehow, even though, I mean, you and I know the science is pretty unequivocal here.
But let's say it wasn't as dire as we think it is, which would be great, frankly.
Sure. Right, of course. I would be overjoyed.
But still, there's very little downside to literally cleaner city air, for example, right?
To better air. Like, look at Beijing. Right.
Well, there's Beijing and New Delhi
have New
been just in the news these couple of weeks, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, forest fires, whatever. Let's not get into that because then it becomes a long list. But I think that's a great way of thinking about it, though, because I think a lot of people struggle with sort of just figuring out what to say. Like, what do you say, especially in person? Like, what do you?
It's also, it's also a matter of, we mobilized civilizationally to fight fascism 50 years, however many years ago. I guess that was 75 years ago at this point. And it was a boon to everyone's economy to do that, right? So there's also this argument of like, we'll spend so much money. And yeah, in the near term we will, but we'll create so much new wealth and so many new jobs. And wouldn't you rather be working for a new industry than for a dying one? Any angle someone comes at me with, aside from, aside from the blatant conspiracy theories, if someone comes at me with a conspiracy theory where they're like, climate change is just a conspiracy theory to get XYZ, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, okay, that isn't true.
It's not really worth engaging, actually.
Right, exactly.
Like that.
Exactly.
Maybe if it's online, like just maybe responding and saying something sort of coherent, just so that other people might maybe see.
Exactly. Right.
But in terms of convincing the individual, I'm not sure that's really worth anybody's effort at this point. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. This was great.
Hello, me again. Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope that was as interesting and useful for you as it was for me. As always, I encourage you to visit our website, fatalair.blog, to subscribe to our mailing list and find other ways to contribute and help us support the project. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.